An elderly woman rode the same Boston City bus every evening for a month, always silent, always alone. Then one night, she vanished without a trace. Under her seat, a nun's headscarf was found, brand new, out of place. When detectives reviewed the final bus footage, what they saw, and what they later uncovered, would expose a chilling secret buried for 30 years. The city bus creaked to a stop under the pale glow of a flickering street lamp. The late autumn dusk had settled fast over the streets of Boston, throwing long shadows between rows of aging brownstones and shuttered storefronts. Inside the nearest Buston, the scent of warm vinyl seats mixed with faint traces of cleaning fluid and the metallic tang of old coins. It was the last run of the night, and the only passenger remaining was the old woman who had sat in that same seat, row 4, window side, for nearly a month. Margaret Whitmore. The driver, Tom Reynolds, a seasoned man in his early 50s with a weary smile and a keen eye, had grown used to her silent presence. Every evening, at precisely 6:45 p.m., she would board the 27 line from the corner of Tremont and Camden, always clutching a small leather-bound book, her pale hands trembling slightly beneath the cuff of her coat. She never spoke, never acknowledged anyone. She simply rode in silence, gazing out into the darkening city as if searching for something lost to time. Tonight, however, something was different. The bus had made its usual loop through the South End and was nearing the last stop at Washington Square, but Margaret was nowhere to be seen. Tom noticed it immediately when he glanced into the rearview mirror. Her seat was empty. Strange, he thought. He hadn't seen her board earlier. His stomach tightened with unease. Perhaps she had finally missed a day, but after nearly a month of unwavering routine, it didn't feel right. After dropping off the final passenger, Tom pulled into the small depot behind the bus yard and prepared to lock up. Out of habit more than protocol, he walked the length of the bus, checking for stray belongings or sleeping passengers. That's when he saw it. There, partially tucked beneath the seat where Margaret always sat, was a neatly folded piece of cloth, a deep indigo blue edged with delicate white lace. It was unmistakably a nun's headscarf, the kind worn with traditional habits. Tom's breath caught. She never wore anything like that, he muttered, a chill crawling up his spine. He knelt and picked it up carefully. The fabric felt oddly new between his calloused fingers. No dust, no sign of age, just a faint, lingering scent of lavender and something older, incense perhaps. Curiosity gnawed at him. Tom wasn't one to pry, but this felt wrong. He placed the scarf in a clear evidence bag from the driver's kit, logged the discovery, and called it in, per company policy. Within the hour, Detective Laura Grayson arrived at the depot. She was in her early 40s, sharp-eyed, with a reputation for catching details others missed. "A nun's scarf, you say?" she asked, arching a brow as Tom handed it over. "Yeah, seat 4, where that old woman's been sitting every night." Laura examined the cloth closely, her gaze narrowing. "This isn't old. Maybe 6 months at most." Tom frowned. It always looked like she'd come from another time, wore an old wool coat, beat-up shoes. Never spoke. Laura's fingers stilled. "What was her name?" "I think Margaret." "Margaret Whitmore." She used her senior pass, had the name on it. Laura's heart skipped. She opened her phone and quickly searched the department database. The name rang a distant bell. A few taps later, the screen filled with an old, grainy photo. Margaret Whitmore. Simpson's 1993. Last seen at Cecilia's Convent, Vermont. Presumed dead. Case closed in 1998 due to lack of leads. "Jesus," Laura whispered. "She's been missing for 30 years. Tom blinked in shock. "But she's been riding my bus every night." Panic edged his voice. "I swear, Detective, it was her." Laura stood, her mind racing. If Margaret had resurfaced after 3 decades, why here? Why now? And why vanish again, leaving behind this scarf that didn't belong to her time? She ordered a full forensic sweep of the bus, no fingerprints other than Tom's, and a few smudges that defied easy identification. No CCTV footage of Margaret boarding that night. She simply wasn't there. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. The following morning, Laura visited the last known address on Margaret's file, a dilapidated row house in South Boston, long abandoned. The current owner claimed no knowledge of anyone by that name. Digging deeper, Laura discovered that St. Cecilia's had closed in 1994 after a series of troubling allegations and the unexplained disappearance of 3 nuns, including one novice named Eliza Quinn. Margaret Whitmore was never officially linked to the scandal, but whispers suggested she had been one of the last to see the missing sisters. Now, 30 years later, she had resurfaced, only to disappear again. Laura stared at the scarf on her desk. The fabric was confirmed by a textile analyst to be part of a custom order from a boutique supplier that had only been in business since spring of this year. Someone had given Margaret this scarf recently. Someone wanted her found or silenced. Panic built in Laura's chest. This wasn't just an old missing persons case anymore. It was something deeper, something still alive beneath the city's polished surface. As she prepared to reopen the file, a chilling thought crept in. Had Margaret truly returned of her own will, or had someone brought her back, only to make her vanish once more? Detective Laura Grayson arrived early the next morning at the city's transportation hub, her mind still looping through the odd details of the night before. Margaret Whitmore, a name buried in cold case files, now thrust back into the light by a single piece of cloth and a driver's trembling account. The bus depot buzzed with the low hum of engines and the chatter of mechanics preparing for the day's first routes. Laura found Tom Reynolds in the break room, nursing a strong cup of black coffee. His hands were steady now, but the strain in his eyes remained. When Laura entered, he straightened in his chair, almost expectant. "Detective," he greeted her. "I haven't stopped thinking about it all night." Laura pulled out her notepad and offered a calm smile. "Good, let's go over it again. Tell me everything you remember about Margaret's routine." Tom exhaled slowly. It was always the same. She boarded at the Tremont and Camden stop around 6:45, every single evening. Never earlier, never later, no matter the weather. Laura jotted this down. "Always alone?" Tom nodded. "Always. And here's the thing, I don't remember ever seeing her get off. Not once." Laura looked up sharply. "Explain." Tom rubbed the back of his neck. "Most nights I'd drive all the way to Washington Square, end of the line. I'd glance back, expecting to find the bus empty, but she'd still be there, staring out the window. When I walked through to lock up, gone. No sign of her. The first few times I thought maybe I'd missed her slipping off at a stop without me noticing. But after a month," he shook his head. "I started checking, watching the mirror. I never saw her leave." Laura's pen hovered over the paper. "She vanished between runs." "Exactly, and yet no one else on the route noticed her either." Tom spread his hands. "I asked around yesterday. Other drivers, some said they'd seen her sitting there, but no one remembered her getting on or off except at that one stop. Like a ghost." The word hung between them. Laura dismissed it with a practiced flick of her pen. "I'll need to review the bus footage." Tom rose. "I already pulled it for you. Come on." In the small surveillance room behind the dispatcher's office, Tom queued up the last week's worth of footage on an aging monitor. The first few nights were uneventful. Passengers boarded, joked, stared at phones, and disembarked in a blur of routine. But every evening, precisely at 6:45 p.m., the camera captured the same image. A frail figure stepping aboard at Tremont and Camden. Margaret. Her pale features partially obscured by the shadow of her coat's collar, leather-bound book clutched to her chest. She moved with deliberate care, her step slow but sure, eyes lowered. Tom paused the footage. "See? Always alone." Laura leaned closer. "Keep playing." The footage continued. Margaret made her way to seat 4, window side, and settled in. From that point onward, the footage grew eerie. As the route progressed, Margaret barely moved, yet her lips parted often in silent murmurs. Laura frowned. "Rewind. Zoom in on her face." Tom complied, enhancing the grainy image. Margaret's mouth moved steadily, her eyes flicking down toward the space beneath her seat. "She's talking to herself," Laura observed, her voice low. "Or someone," Tom added grimly. They watched as Margaret's hand slipped down between her legs and the seat edge. She seemed to touch something beneath it, then quickly withdrew her hand as another passenger boarded nearby. Laura felt a chill creep over her skin. Pause, Go frame by frame." Slowly, the feed revealed Margaret's repeated glances downward, her subtle motions as if checking on something hidden. A folded slip of paper, a small box. The angle made it impossible to tell, but the pattern repeated night after night. At the final stop, Washington Square, the feed showed her still sitting calmly as the bus emptied. Then a gap. No footage of her disembarking. The next frame showed an empty seat. Laura sat back, mind racing. No one saw her enter, except at the one stop. "That's what I've been telling you," Tom said softly. Laura rubbed her temple. "What time does that stop usually see foot traffic?" "Not much at that hour," Tom replied. "Mostly workers coming off shift, a few students. I think the nearby church holds evening mass around 7, so the area is not completely deserted." Laura's brow furrowed. "Church?" "Yeah, St. Dominic's. Been there for over 100 years. Laura made a mental note. "And the scarf, was it ever visible?" Tom shook his head. "Never saw it on her. Always the same coat, the same book. That scarf just appeared." Laura stood, determination sharpening her features. "I want full copies of all footage from the past month. I'll also need a list of every passenger who boarded and disembarked during those runs." Tom nodded. "I'll get the dispatcher on it." As Laura turned to leave, Tom's voice stopped her. "Detective, do you think she's really gone, or—" Laura met his gaze, her own steady. "I think someone wanted us to notice." Outside, the crisp morning air bit through Laura's coat. She walked briskly to her car, the city's muted hum a distant echo to the questions swirling in her mind. Margaret's return wasn't random. The scarf wasn't old, and those murmured words, that hidden object beneath the seat. They weren't the habits of a confused, elderly woman. They were deliberate, intentional. Somewhere in this tangled web lay a truth that had been buried for decades. Laura started the engine and drove toward St. Dominic's, her resolve hardening. She needed answers, and fast. The chill of late October deepened as the days passed since the strange discovery on the bus. Detective Laura Grayson worked methodically, combing through surveillance footage, passenger logs, and archives about St. Cecilia's Convent in Vermont. The scarf had been sent to the forensics lab, but no fingerprints surfaced other than Margaret's partial prints, confirmed through old medical records, confirmed through old unknown substance yet to be identified. Meanwhile, news of the case began to trickle into local circles. Whispers among transit regulars and late-night riders gave the bus an eerie reputation. The seat where Margaret had always sat was now avoided, as if marked by her disappearance. On the following Friday evening, just past 9, a frequent rider named Alex Tran boarded the Castle to a Rotusk event. A quiet graduate student in history, Alex rode the route several nights a week to visit his aunt, who lived near the final stop. He'd heard snippets of the story from fellow passengers, but dismissed them as urban legend. However, curiosity gnawed at him. That night, the bus was nearly empty. Tom Reynolds, still on his regular shift, gave Alex a brief nod. "She's not coming back," Tom said grimly as Alex passed him. Alex offered a polite smile and made his way to the 4th row, window seat. The space seemed untouched except for the faint trace of lavender that lingered in the air. As the bus rumbled through the darkened streets, Alex's gaze wandered. Almost absently, he ran his fingers along the edge of the seat cushion. Something caught beneath his touch, a thin, brittle edge of paper wedged deep in the crevice. His pulse quickened. Carefully, he teased the object free. It was an old photograph, yellowed with time, a black-and-white image of a grand stone building surrounded by towering maples. Scrawled in fading ink on the back were the words, "St. Cecilia's Convent, Vermont, 1965. Alex stared at the image, heart pounding. He knew that name. He had read about the convent in an article about historic religious sites in the Northeast. His academic instincts kicked in. Pocketing the photo, he rode the remainder of the route in a daze, hardly aware of the passing streets. At home, he scanned the image and sent it with a brief note to a colleague in Vermont who specialized in ecclesiastical history. The response came within the hour. "Alex, you found something rare. St. Cecilia's was closed after a major scandal in the early 90s. There was a disappearance. 3 young nuns vanished without a trace. There were rumors of corruption, even abuse within the order. The entire place was shuttered and left to decay." The message included a link to an archived news article from 1993. Alex clicked through it with growing dread. The headline read, "Mystery at St. Cecilia's. 3 novices vanish. Convent closed amid allegations." The article detailed the sudden disappearance of 3 sisters in training, Sister Claire Monroe, Sister Beatrice Lynn, and a novice named Sister Eliza Quinn. His breath caught. The name wasn't Margaret, but as he read further, one detail stood out. Sources report that a 4th woman, Margaret Whitmore, a senior nun and mentor to the missing novices, also disappeared from public view following the incident. Official records list her as having left religious life voluntarily, but no further trace has been found. Alex's fingers trembled as he forwarded the article and the photo to the email address listed for the Boston PD's tip line. Across town, Laura Grayson was burning the midnight oil in her cramped office, piecing together a timeline of Margaret's known movements. The sudden chime of her inbox broke her concentration. The subject line read, "Found on bus seat, important lead." Laura opened the message, eyes widening at the photograph. "St. Cecilia's," she whispered. The attached article deepened her shock. Margaret wasn't just a missing person. She was a central figure in one of the most mysterious, unsolved cases in Vermont's history. Grabbing her phone, she called the Vermont State Police Archives Division. "This is Detective Laura Grayson, Boston PD. I need full access to any records you have on the St. Cecilia's case. The name Margaret Whitmore just resurfaced." There was a pause on the line. "Detective," came the cautious reply, "that case is complicated. A lot of it's sealed. But if you're telling me you've got new evidence, I'll see what I can do." Within hours, Laura received a digital packet of old reports, heavily redacted. Yet the outline was clear. In the fall of 1993, 3 novices vanished after allegedly preparing to expose misconduct within the convent. Sister Eliza Quinn, the youngest, was last seen speaking with Margaret Whitmore, her mentor. Days later, Margaret herself disappeared. The convent shut down within months. Whispers of higher-level involvement and a cover-up persisted, but no charges were ever filed. "Eliza Quinn," Laura murmured, her mind racing. The scarf, the murmured words on the bus, the photograph. It was all connected, but why return now, after 30 years? And what had Margaret been hiding beneath that seat? The next step was clear. She needed to find out what remained of St. Cecilia's. If there were answers to be found, they would lie amid its crumbling walls and forgotten halls. Yet even as she made her preparations, a strange unease prickled at the edge of her thoughts. Someone had gone to great lengths to bury this past, and now, as Laura delved deeper, she could almost feel unseen eyes watching, waiting for her next move. Detective Laura Grayson drove through the cold rain sweeping across the Vermont Disstate, her wipers beating a steady rhythm against the windshield. The photograph, the sealed reports, and the resurfacing of Margaret Whitmore were threads of a tapestry that refused to stay buried. Now she was on her way to the only place that might hold more answers, the Vermont State Mental Health Archives in Montpelier. The call from the state archivist had been brief but electrifying. "Detective, there's a file you need to see. It came to light only after your request. Somehow it was misfiled, likely deliberate. The name is Margaret Whitmore." Laura gripped the wheel tighter, her pulse quickening. Upon arrival, the facility's archival wing greeted her with an air of solemn neglect. Rows of gray metal cabinets, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. The archivist, a thin man named Warren Keene, met her at the door, clutching a battered manila folder. "We weren't supposed to have this," he said softly. "It was hidden in a mislabeled box from an old closure. The date on it matches the time right after the St. Cecilia's incident." Laura took the folder carefully. Inside were brittle yellow documents, intake forms, physician notes, progress reports, all under the name Patient. Whitmore Margaret had assumed this identity. The intake date was November 14, 1993, just weeks after the convent scandal. According to the notes, Margaret had been admitted under the care of Dr. Helen Farrow, a psychiatrist specializing in trauma-induced dissociative disorders. The first few entries described a deeply paranoid patient, often speaking in fragmented sentences about the others, the betrayal, and the shadows behind the cloth. One line chilled Laura to the bone. Patient insists that they will come for her if she ever speaks of the night the sisters vanished. The records detailed gradual improvement over 6 months, followed by a sudden decline. On June 6, 1994, a final entry read, "Patient absent from morning rounds." Room found empty. No signs of forced exit. Security footage missing from the preceding 12 hours. Case marked as escape. Probable external assistance involved. From that day forward, there were no further records. Laura stared at the pages, her mind racing. Margaret hadn't simply disappeared voluntarily. She had been hiding. And someone had helped her vanish from the institution. Laura snapped photos of the entire file and thanked Warren, her thoughts spiraling as she exited into the damp afternoon. Back in Boston, she returned to her office, pinning a printed timeline to the wall. 1993, Margaret vanishes. From institutions, from the bus. But what had driven her into hiding for 3 decades? And why had she reappeared now? The forensic report on the scarf and seat residue came in that evening, adding a new, sinister layer to the mystery. The lab's lead technician, Sarah Holt, called Laura personally. "Detective, we found something you need to know." "Go on," Laura urged. Trace elements of mercury were detected on the scarf and beneath the seat. Not enough for acute toxicity, but consistent with long-term low-level exposure. Lara frowned. Meaning your missing nun may have been slowly poisoned. The pattern matches chronic mercury vapor exposure. Very deliberate, very targeted. And here's the kicker. The samples show fresh accumulation. We're talking within the past 6 months. Laura's stomach twisted. Someone had been poisoning Margaret recently. Not an old wound from her time in the convent, but a renewed attempt to silence her. The implications were staggering. "Could this have contributed to her behavior on the bus?" Laura asked. "Absolutely," Sarah replied. "Mercury poisoning can cause tremors, paranoia, memory lapses, speech disruptions, all of which match what you described." Laura hung up, her thoughts dark and turbulent. Margaret had been poisoned, likely to prevent her from revealing something. Her escape from the institution wasn't random, it had been orchestrated, and now, 30 years later, the danger had returned. The photo, the murmured words, the hidden movements beneath the seat, they were all acts of a woman desperate to protect a truth too dangerous to speak aloud. But who was behind this renewed threat? And why had they waited until now to strike? Laura needed answers. She stared at the timeline on her wall, then at the list of names linked to St. Cecilia's. Among them, one stood out, a former priest turned recluse, once implicated but never charged, Father Malcolm Rourke. If anyone still carried the secrets of that dark chapter, it was him. Determined, Laura picked up her phone and began dialing the numbers she had unearthed from the sealed records. Detective Laura Grayson leaned back in her chair, eyes fixed on the chaotic timeline now spanning her office wall. Margaret's life was a puzzle of vanished years, false identities, and a poisonous thread winding through her recent past. The name Father Malcolm Rourke blinked on her laptop screen, once a rising star in the diocese, though no charges had ever stuck. He had retreated into obscurity, now reportedly living as a recluse near the Vermont-New Hampshire border. But Laura had no intention of rushing that lead until she understood more about the immediate threat circling Margaret. The forensic report weighed heavily on her mind. Someone was poisoning Margaret now, and whoever it was had likely been aware of her recent reappearance. The question remained, who was watching her? To answer this, Laura revisited the one constant in Margaret's final weeks, the bus. That evening, she requested access to the full month's worth of external surveillance footage from the E27 line. Though internal bus cameras had already been reviewed, the depot's perimeter cameras had not yet been scrutinized in detail. Several hours later, poring over grainy video, Laura spotted something odd. At Washington Square Station, the final stop on the 27 route, a tall figure appeared regularly in the background. Every night between 7:30 and 8:00 p.m., a man would arrive and stand near the edge of the platform. He never boarded. He never met anyone. He simply waited, leaning against a lamppost or idling near the benches, always with a cigarette in hand, face partially obscured by a dark baseball cap and scarf. The timestamp told the story clearly. Each night, Margaret rode the bus. The man was there. When she stopped riding, he stopped appearing. Laura's pulse quickened. Zooming in frame by frame, she captured stills of his face. The resolution was poor, but a distinct scar across his right cheek and a small tattoo near his neck, partially visible above the scarf, offered unique identifiers. Laura circulated the images through facial recognition databases and local law enforcement networks. Meanwhile, she cross-referenced passenger manifests with known associates of the St. Cecilia's case, though no immediate connection surfaced. 2 days later, her phone buzzed, Detective Pete Navarro from the Financial Crimes Division. "Laura, we might have something. Go on," she said sharply. "Your mystery man, he popped up in one of our flagged transaction Georgia reviews." "Where?" "An unlicensed money transfer service operating out of South Boston. They handle a lot of under-the-table cash flows. Your guy has been sending weekly payments, small amounts, $200 to $300, under the alias John Carr." Laura's heart skipped. "Recipient, Margaret Whitmore," Pete confirmed. "Cash pickups at a Bogey on Tremont and Camden, the same corner where she boarded the bus." The connection crystallized. Someone had been paying Margaret under the table, likely to keep her afloat while in hiding. Whether it was support or hush money remained to be seen. Laura requested full transaction logs and dates. They painted a telling picture. For the past 6 months, matching the suspected window of mercury exposure, Margaret had been collecting weekly cash payments from this John Carr. The last recorded pickup had been 3 days before her disappearance. The pattern suggested coercion or dependency. Perhaps Margaret had been forced into contact with this man after decades in hiding. Her isolation shattered by renewed threats. Laura cross-checked the alias through known offender registries and old clergy records, but the trail remained cold. However, the tattoo visible on the surveillance image offered a breakthrough. A distinctive Celtic knot design matched one registered to a former enforcer for the diocese's black market fund, Vincent Hale. Hale had been implicated in laundering church funds during the St. Cecilia's aftermath, but had disappeared after narrowly escaping prosecution. His last known address was in South Boston, mere blocks from the money transfer location. Laura felt the noose tightening. If Hale had re-emerged to manipulate or threaten Margaret, he might hold the key to unraveling the deeper conspiracy. She compiled a new briefing for her team and issued a discreet BOLO, alert for Hale, focusing on transit hubs and the Tremont-Camden area. Late that night, reviewing one final loop of the surveillance footage, Laura caught something chilling. On the last night Margaret had ridden the bus, Hale appeared more agitated. He arrived at Washington Square 10 minutes early, pacing and checking his phone. When the bus pulled in and Margaret failed to disembark, his reaction was telling. He crushed his cigarette underfoot, scanned the bus windows intently, then vanished into the shadows. Laura replayed the footage again and again, her gut tightening. Hale had been waiting for Margaret that night, and when she failed to appear, something shifted. Either Margaret had sensed the trap, or something had already happened to her. The clock was ticking. Laura knew she needed to move fast, before whatever force that had driven Margaret underground for 30 years silenced the story for good. Detective Laura Grayson stared at the last surveillance frame of Vincent Hale. His tense posture at the Washington Square stop burned into her mind. The man had been watching, waiting, and when Margaret failed to appear, his barely concealed fury had said everything. Laura leaned forward in her chair, exhaustion tugging at her, but overwidges need to be pulled. The unreviewed camera angles from inside the bus, on the night Margaret vanished. While the depot had supplied general footage, a forensic technician flagged a higher resolution feed from a backup DVR stored on the bus itself, covering angles not yet analyzed. Laura called in the technician, Alex Sims, a meticulous young man with a knack for coaxing hidden data from old hardware. Together, they loaded the feed, 7:42 p.m., the last verified sighting of Margaret. The bus rattled along its usual route, interior mostly empty. Margaret, bundled in her heavy coat, sat in her usual spot, the leather-bound book clutched tightly in her lap. But her demeanor was different. She kept glancing over her shoulder toward the back of the bus, her movements jerky, breath visibly quickened. Alex froze the frame. "She looks terrible," Laura ordered. The footage resumed. Margaret's lips moved rapidly now, though the bus mic picked up little more than faint murmurs. Alex enhanced the audio, isolating her voice amid the ambient noise. The words came through distorted but unmistakable. They found me." Laura's heart pounded. Margaret rose unsteadily, clutching the seat for balance. She looked down beneath her seat, briefly whispered something inaudible, then stumbled toward the front of the bus. At 7:49 p.m., the feed showed her stepping off at an unscheduled stop along Tremont Street. Moments later, the bus pulled away, leaving only shadows behind. Laura's breath caught. "She knew they were coming," she whispered. Alex nodded grimly. "And she didn't come back." Laura replayed the segment twice more, each time noting the deliberate glance Margaret cast beneath her seat before leaving. A hidden message? A last safeguard? Without hesitation, Laura drove to the depot and requested access to the bus. With the cooperation of Tom Reynolds, still rattled but eager to help, they unlocked the vehicle late that night. The air inside was cold and stale, silence thick enough to press against Laura's ears. Flashlight in hand, she approached seat 4. The cushion felt slightly uneven under her touch. Carefully, she peeled back the worn vinyl covering, fingers probing along the edges. Something caught beneath her nails, a rough edge, cloth-bound. Heart racing, Laura worked it free, a small notebook, aged and water-stained but intact, wedged deep beneath the seat's padding. She opened it carefully. The first page bore a single line in elegant script, property of Sister Eliza Quinn. The name hit her like a hammer blow. Sister Eliza Quinn, the youngest of the 3 missing novitiates from St. Cecilia's, presumed vanished along with Margaret. Yet here was proof that they were one and the same. Laura flipped through the fragile pages, each line penned in a shaky but determined hand. The entries spanned decades, fragmented accounts of fear, exile, and survival. One section, marked with trembling underlines, read, "They will never stop looking. Father Rourke knows. Hale is their hound. I must remain invisible, for Claire and Beatrice, for the truth they tried to silence. I am no longer Sister Eliza. I am Margaret now, but the poison seeps through still. I cannot run much longer." Laura's pulse thundered. Hale had been hunting her under the orders of a man long thought neutralized, Father Malcolm Rourke. The implication was clear. The conspiracy that had swallowed the lives of 3 young nuns had endured, hidden beneath the veneer of time. And Margaret, Eliza, had been the last thread keeping the truth alive. The notebook continued with more cryptic entries. Mentions of secret archives, coded locations within the ruined convent grounds, and a final note dated just days before her disappearance. They grow impatient. The payments come with threats now. The poison sharpens my mind, even as it weakens my body. If I am found, let this record speak when I no longer can. The stakes had shifted dramatically. Margaret's reemergence wasn't an accident. It was a desperate act of resistance against a darkness reaching back 30 years. Yet the most chilling question remained. Where was she now? Detective Laura Grayson stood in the dim light of her office, the small notebook of Sister Eliza Quinn laid open before her. The lines within burned with urgency, revealing a hidden war that had spanned decades. The entries were raw, fragmented, but one truth now stood clear. The woman the city had known as Margaret Whitmore had been the last living witness to one of the most quietly buried scandals in church history, and the forces that had once silenced her sisters were closing in again. Laura turned from the notebook, her mind racing through the next steps. Vincent Hale was the immediate threat. His payments, the surveillance, his presence at the final bus stop all pointed to a coordinated effort. But behind Hale lurked another shadow, one more dangerous. Father Malcolm Rourke, the priest once implicated in the original case, now presumed retired in disgrace. Before Laura could act, her phone buzzed sharply on the desk. "Detective Grayson," she answered briskly. "Ma'am, it's Officer Riley Chen from the task force," came the voice of the young patrol officer who'd been assisting with cross-jurisdictional leads. "I think you need to hear this in person." "Come to my office," Laura ordered. Within 20 minutes, Officer Riley Chen entered, eyes wide with barely restrained emotion. A junior officer assigned to Laura's team in recent months, Riley had proven herself sharp and methodical. Now she clutched a faded manila envelope. "I was going through old internal reports and personal files linked to St. Cecilia's," Riley began, voice taut. "I wasn't sure if I should mention it before, but now I think it matters." She laid the envelope on the desk, sliding out a single photograph. It showed 3 young nuns in novice habits standing before the old convent's stone archway. Beneath their feet, a handwritten caption: Sisters Claire Monroe, Beatrice Lynn, Eliza Quinn, 1993. "My great-aunt," Riley said softly, pointing to the woman in the center. "Claire Monroe. She vanished that night. My family never spoke of it again. I only learned the truth when I joined the force and started digging." Laura stared at her, surprise flickering through her features. "You're related to one of them?" Riley nodded, her voice trembling. "I never expected to find a living witness, and now that we know Margaret is Eliza, it changes everything," Laura finished. Her mind spinning, Riley drew a shaky breath. "My grandmother always said Claire was trying to expose something terrible. I think that's why I became a cop, to finish what she started." Laura regarded her with new understanding. The young officer's connection to the case wasn't just professional, it was deeply personal. But the revelations didn't end there. Later that afternoon, the facial recognition alert from Financial Crimes came through with a new hit. The grainy still of the man at the bus stop, enhanced and cross-referenced, had returned a match. The name listed was not Vincent Hale, at least not anymore. According to the record, the man now operated under the alias James Caro, with forged documents placing him in South Boston since 2018. But deeper files, buried within interagency intelligence reports, told a darker story. James Carroll was an assumed identity. The man was in fact Father Malcolm Rourke himself, stripped of his clerical title but never charged. After the St. Cecilia scandal, Rourke had vanished from public life amid swirling allegations of misconduct, financial fraud, and possible complicity in the disappearance of the 3 nuns. Over the years, investigative threads had repeatedly failed to produce actionable evidence. Now it seemed Rourke had resurfaced, operating through his former enforcer Hale, manipulating the poisoned threads of Margaret's life. The realization hit Laura like a thunderclap. Hale had been paying Margaret under orders from Rourke, a man who had carefully built a new identity to avoid detection. The scheme was not merely about money or silence, it was about control, about ensuring the last surviving witness could never expose the truth. Laura briefed Riley immediately. The 2 women now joined not only by professional duty, but by the personal weight of justice long denied. "Rourke is the key," Laura said grimly. "He's been orchestrating this from the shadows," Riley's jaw set. "Then we bring him into the light." They began compiling a new dossier, linking financial flows, surveillance footage, and personal histories into an intricate web centered on Rourke. Yet as they worked late into the night, one question remained unanswered. Why had Rourke and Hale grown so desperate now, after so many years? What new danger had Margaret Eliza posed to them in these final weeks before her disappearance? The answer, they both knew, likely hidden in the one place no one had dared revisit, St. Cecilia's itself, its crumbling ruins still whispering secrets long thought buried. Detective Laura Grayson barely slept that night. The revelations about Father Malcolm Rourke, now living under the false identity of James Carroll, had detonated the case wide open. Sitting across from her was Officer Riley Chen, her eyes reflecting the same hard determination that Laura herself felt. "We need to know how deep this goes," Laura said, voice hoarse from hours of talking, "and we need to find out what happened to Margaret, Eliza, before it's too late." The 2 officers compiled everything they had on Rourke, tracking known associates and points of contact. They also issued a discreet request for records from local clinics and hospitals, hoping to uncover any trail Margaret may have left in her final weeks. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. An early morning call from the administrator of Mercy Hill Medical Center arrived as Laura poured her second cup of coffee. "Detective Grayson, we just processed your inquiry. There's something odd regarding a recent payment linked to Margaret Whitmore." Laura's pulse quickened. "Go on," the administrator continued. "Margaret had several outpatient visits over the past few months, mainly related to neurological symptoms consistent with mercury poisoning. Last month, a new payment appeared, cash, no insurance used, but the receipt lists the name James Caro as the responsible party." Laura's breath caught. "You're certain?" "Positive. We double-checked the records. It's an unusual entry. Caro wasn't listed as a relative or emergency contact previously." Laura thanked the administrator and immediately looped Riley in. "Rourke paid her medical bills," she said grimly. "He wasn't just surveilling her, he was controlling her access to care, managing her dependency." Riley's jaw tightened. Classic predator tactic. Keep her isolated. Keep her reliant. They prepared an immediate warrant to search Rourke's known residence, a nondescript brick building on a quiet side street in South Boston. Officially, the unit belonged to a shell company linked to his false identity, but now they had cause to enter. That afternoon, with backup in place, they approached the apartment. Laura led the entry team, badge and warrant in hand. The door yielded easily to the team's tools. Inside, the space appeared deceptively normal, a modest living room, worn furniture, sparse decoration. But Laura's instincts screamed otherwise. "Fan out," she ordered. "Check for any concealed spaces." It was Riley who noticed the discrepancy first. In the rear hallway, a faded bookshelf seemed oddly shallow against the wall. Testing the edges, she found a hidden latch. With a click, the entire unit swung open to reveal a narrow staircase descending into a basement chamber. The air grew colder as they descended, the faint scent of mildew mingling with something older, parchment, ink, dust-laden secrets. At the bottom, their flashlights illuminated a cramped room lined with steel filing cabinets and cluttered tables. On one wall, an array of photographs had been pinned, surveillance shots of Margaret at bus stops, entering the clinic, walking through shadowed streets. Each image was meticulously dated and labeled. "Jesus," Riley whispered. Laura's gaze swept the room, taking in the depth of obsession laid bare. The photos spanned months, possibly years, a timeline of control, of stalking. On one table sat an open ledger, pages filled with financial notations. Scanning them, Laura spotted entries that matched the bodega payments. Rourke had funded the transfers through multiple shell accounts, ensuring Margaret remained in his grip. But the most damning discovery lay in the cabinets. Inside were manila folders marked St. Cecilia's Confidential. Pulling them free, Laura and Riley flipped through brittle documents, disciplinary records, correspondence between high-ranking church officials, even unsigned witness statements implicating Rourke in the coercion and abuse of young novices. One page, yellowed with age, bore a handwritten list of names: Claire Monroe, Beatrice Lynn, Eliza Quinn, with the word liabilities scrawled beside them. Another folder contained grainy black and white photos of the convent's interior, focusing on what appeared to be a hidden chamber beneath the chapel. Marginalia noted the location as Archive Room, Sealed Post, Incident. "He knew where the records were kept," Laura said, voice low, "and he's been trying to erase anyone who could expose them." Riley's hand shook slightly as she held one of the photographs. "My great-aunt died for this, and Margaret—" "She's the last one left who knew the full truth." Laura's mind raced. The hidden archive at St. Cecilia's could hold the key to everything, proof of the conspiracy, of the church's cover-up. And Rourke's frantic attempts to monitor and poison Margaret suggested he feared what might resurface. They documented everything meticulously, securing the materials for forensic analysis. Yet even as the evidence mounted, one chilling question remained. Where was Rourke now? His apartment showed no recent signs of occupancy, and if he suspected they were closing in, there was no telling how far he would go to silence the last witness forever. Detective Laura Grayson stood in the forensic evidence room, her fingers lightly brushing the edge of the ancient folders recovered from the hidden basement of James Caro's apartment. Officer Riley Chen was beside her, pale but composed, her family's past now entangled in the same web Laura was desperate to untangle. The documents had already revealed so much: proof of Rourke's obsession, the chilling references to liabilities, the surveillance of Margaret. Yet it was the final file they had not yet opened that now rested ominously on the table, marked only with 3 faded letters, FBI. With a glance toward Riley, Laura flipped the folder open. Inside lay a collection of memos, correspondence between field agents, and a heavily redacted case report. The header read, Subject, Eliza Quinn, alias Margaret Whitmore, Whitmer's Protection Initiative, Joint Operation with DJ Task. Laura felt her breath catch. "She was working with the feds," she whispered. Riley leaned closer, eyes scanning the documents. The report detailed a covert agreement made in 1994 after Margaret's disappearance from the mental institution. Rather than an escape, it had been a staged extraction orchestrated by the FBI. Margaret, as the only surviving witness to the events at St. Cecilia's, had agreed to cooperate with federal investigators under the condition of a completely new identity. The files suggested that internal elements within the church had wielded influence at the highest levels. Judges, politicians, even law enforcement officials had been implicated in the cover-up of the novices' disappearances. The most damning piece, however, was the mention of a missing ledger, referred to only as the Black Safe. According to the report, the safe had been hidden within the chapel's foundation at St. Cecilia's, a repository of sensitive documents, financial records, personal correspondence, and possibly photographic evidence implicating key figures. Margaret had known the safe's location, but under federal guidance she had withheld that information to leverage broader protection and to avoid giving Rourke, or anyone connected to him, access to it. The case report abruptly ended with a notation: protection compromised, asset relocated, ongoing risk assessment required. No further updates were required, no further silence, but because she held the last key to exposing everything. Riley's hands clenched, and now they know she's alive. They came after her not just to silence her, but to force her to give up the location of that safe. Laura nodded grimly. That's why the poisoning started. Not just punishment, leverage. If she was too weak to resist, they could extract what they wanted. They now understood Hale's role. He wasn't trying to kill Margaret outright, but to break her will, keep her dependent, while Rourke maneuvered behind the scenes to extract the safe's location. The surveillance, the payments, even the staged visits to Mercy Hill, they were all designed to gradually corner her. Laura's phone buzzed then, snapping her from her thoughts. It was Agent Marisa Holt from the Boston FBI field office, returning Laura's earlier urgent message. Laura switched the call to speaker. "Agent Holt, we found something you need to hear." She quickly summarized the discovery of the hidden FBI file, the witness protection detail, and the references to the Black Safe. There was a pause on the line, followed by a sharp intake of breath. "Detective Grayson," Holt said finally, her voice taut. "That ledger was the single most dangerous piece of evidence we ever pursued regarding St. Cecilia's. The program to protect Margaret Eliza was one of the most controversial decisions our office made. We believed she had gone dark years ago. The fact that she's surfaced again means someone high up is very nervous. We believe Rourke is actively trying to find her," Laura said, "and based on the documents we've recovered, he's after the safe." Holt hesitated. "If he gets it, it won't just endanger Margaret. It could unravel decades of sealed agreements and implicate sitting officials. You need to find her before he does, and you need to secure that safe." "We're already moving," Laura assured her, "and we'll need your support." "You'll have it," Holt replied. "But be careful, Detective. You're walking into territory most of us hoped would stay buried." As the call ended, Laura and Riley exchanged grim looks. The stakes had just escalated beyond anything they had imagined. "He's getting desperate," Riley said. "If we don't find her first," Laura nodded, "we will. And then we find that safe." They began compiling a new operational plan, one that would take them deep into the heart of St. Cecilia's ruins, where the past had waited far too long to be unearthed. The urgency in Detective Laura Grayson's voice was unmistakable as she led a joint task force through the rain-slicked streets of South Boston. FBI agents had confirmed the Black Safe was real, and with the web of influence that still lingered in the shadows of St. Cecilia's, the race to secure it was critical. But before they could act, they had to find Margaret Eliza. A single intel ping had come in. A local informant reported seeing an elderly woman matching Margaret's description entering a rundown apartment complex 3 blocks from her last known location. Within minutes, Laura, Officer Riley Chen, and a tactical team were assembled at the address. The building loomed before them, its faded brick facade and broken windows a fitting monument to the secrets it now held. The team breached the door swiftly, each floor cleared with clinical precision. On the 3rd floor, apartment 3B bore faint traces of recent occupancy. A warm coat draped over a chair, a teacup still warm, the scent of lavender hanging in the air. But of Margaret Eliza there was no sign. In the center of the small living room, upon an old oak table, lay her deep indigo headscarf, folded with deliberate care. Beside it, a single white taper candle burned low, its wax pooling slowly upon the table's surface. Laura approached with a sinking heart. No blood, no struggle, just a message left in silence. "She's gone," she said grimly. Riley stood beside her, eyes scanning the room. Not in panic. She planned this. They scoured the apartment for any clue to her whereabouts. In a small drawer they found a bundle of receipts and faded photographs, images of the 3 missing nuns, pages torn from a hymnal, and an old map of St. Cecilia's grounds with cryptic markings along its margins. She knew what she was doing, not by Rourke, not even by us. Not yet. As the forensic team documented the scene, the agents convened outside. The rain had lessened, but the city remained cloaked in a damp gray haze. Back at headquarters, as dawn broke, Laura compiled a detailed report for the FBI. They would coordinate an immediate search of St. Cecilia's ruins, but without Margaret's guidance, finding the black safe could take weeks, time they might not have. Yet fate intervened in the most unexpected way. 3 days later, as Laura arrived at her desk, a small, unmarked envelope awaited her. No postmark, no return address. Inside was a single folded sheet of aged paper. The handwriting was unmistakable, flowing deliberate. To Officer Riley Chen, it began. You carry the blood and the courage of those who came before you. The truth your great-aunt sought lies beneath the chapel's foundation. The west wall, marked by the 3rd stone from the archway's base, the ledger is hidden within. Use it to bring light to what was buried. But know this, I must remain in the shadows once more. They will not cease their hunt, and I cannot endanger others by staying. Trust only what is written here. In faith and remembrance, Sister Eliza Quinn. The letter ended there, no further words. Laura handed it to Riley, who read it with trembling hands. Silent tears welled in the young officer's eyes. She's alive, Riley whispered. She's watching. She trusts us to finish this. And we will, Laura vowed. With the precise instructions in hand, a joint task force was deployed to St. Cecilia's within hours. The ruined chapel stood desolate, its stained glass shattered, the scent of earth and stone thick in the air. Under the faint light of lanterns, they unearthed the hidden compartment. Within, sealed in a rusted iron safe, they found the ledger, bound in black leather, its pages dense with names, transactions, and damning correspondence that spanned decades. The implications were staggering. Judges, politicians, church officials, all complicit in the silence and suffering that had consumed St. Cecilia's. The evidence was irrefutable. In the weeks that followed, arrests were made, and remirs made, and investigations reopened, and the veil of secrecy that had protected the guilty was torn apart. Yet through it all, one question remained unanswered. Where had Margaret Eliza gone? No further trace of her surfaced. No sightings, no messages. Only the folded scarf, the flickering candle, and the letter remained as testaments to her courage and sacrifice. For Riley, the case became a personal vow. She kept the letter framed upon her desk, a constant reminder of her great-aunt's legacy and the woman who had fought for truth from the shadows. And somewhere, perhaps in the quiet corners of the world, a figure moved unseen, her mission fulfilled, but her journey unfinished. The story of Sister Eliza Quinn remained a whispered legend, a woman who had vanished from the world and vanished once more, leaving justice in her wake and mystery in her past. If you found this story as gripping as we did, make sure to subscribe for more real-life mysteries that will keep you thinking long after the video ends. And tell us, what do you think really happened to Sister Eliza Quinn? Was her final disappearance planned, or was someone still hunting her? We'd love to hear your theories in the comments. Also, where in the world are you watching from today? Let us know below. It's always incredible to see how far these stories travel.